Good afternoon. It's a delight to be able to be with you today. Andre Blackman, who is a member of our external advisory board for the Mayo Clinic Social Media Network, invited me to be part of this to help kick it off, and I'm delighted to be with you. And hope over the next 25 minutes to give you some new ways of thinking about media, particularly about the era that was, the era of mass media, and how the new media, the new era of media in healthcare communications particularly, provides great opportunities for us as healthcare communicators and marketers. So in the next 25 minutes, we're going to do a quick review of the evolution of media in the last half century, talk about how social networking played a huge role in the creation and formation and growth of Mayo Clinic, talk about how we've moved from social networking, the old-fashioned analog social networking that you're doing here today, as well as that has been done since the dawn of human speech, and moving that into social media, which is just amplifying with digital. And then also talk about some resources that we've developed to help us accelerate the transition at Mayo Clinic, and also then make resources available to our colleagues throughout the healthcare industry. So we'll start with a story. And once upon a time, there were three networks. This is when dinosaurs roamed the earth. Three networks dominated the media landscape in the United States. It used to be that you could buy an ad, one broadcast ad on ABC, NBC, and CBS in prime time, and reach 75% of the adult population. Well, actually, you couldn't do that. If you were General Mills or General Dynamics or General Motors, you could do that, because it cost a whole lot of money, but there essentially was a monopoly on the ways of reaching reaching consumers. And each day, these guys and the people who worked with them would decide what the news was. If they decided it was interesting and worth people hearing about, they would broadcast it. Otherwise, you were sort of out of luck. And meanwhile, their local affiliates and newspapers had the monopoly on that audience because there really wasn't any place else to go. And so they were able to sell their audiences to advertisers at monopoly prices. I remember back in 2003 when I was the manager of the Mayo Clinic media relations team, I put about a 3-inch ad in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and it was $2,800. Because I didn't have any other choices. Today that sounds outlandish, but that's the only way we could reach the people we needed to reach. But then one day Ted Turner threw everything up, upset the apple cart altogether when he launched the cable TV revolution. And ESPN followed shortly thereafter by All Sports All the Time, and actually is one of the most valuable broadcast properties today. One of these guys invented the internet, and with all due apologies to your local favorite son here in Tennessee, my money's on the guy on the right. And what that meant, though, is that the mass media didn't understand what was about to hit them. They didn't have really any sense of the magnitude of the coming change. And so just to illustrate this, I want to take you back in the Wayback Machine to 1994, to the set of the Today Show, to hear Bryant Gumbel and Katie Couric wondering about what the internet is.
I wasn't prepared to translate that as I was doing that little tease.
Oh, that's
that little mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At.
See, that's what I said. Mm-hmm. Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I'd never heard it. I'd never heard it said. I'd always seen the mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
I heard be around big fight up in the lunchroom the other week.
There it is. Violence at NBC. GE.com. I mean.
Well, Allison should know.
What is internet anyway?
Internet is that
massive computer network.
Mm-hmm. The one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean that's big? How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
Okay, so Katie Couric and Bryant Gumbel weren't dummies. They were just unfamiliar. They hadn't been introduced to this new platform. And I would just submit that 22 years later, today, you can't imagine life without email. You could maybe dream of life without email, but you can't imagine life without email. And so the interesting thing is that today, Twitter and all these other platforms use that funny A with the ring around it too. It's just a matter of getting familiar with the lingo to be able to take advantage of these new capabilities. But there were a couple of revolutions that were going on that fragmented the audiences and caused great economic upheaval, and particularly for the big media players. The first is the hundreds of cable channels. So they talked about hundreds of cable channels and nothing to watch. But the exponential growth in websites where, in Carl Sagan's terms, there were billions and billions of places to go. There weren't people gathered in one place that could be sold to the advertisers. So that created a lot of pressure on the big media players. It meant that when I was a kid, there used to be a TV doctor on every news program. So the local television station would have a doctor on retainer to come in and explain the medical news. By about 2000 or so, almost no television stations could afford even a dedicated healthcare reporter on a local basis. And all of them were getting rid of their TV doctors. There's a great site called Paper Cuts I'd encourage you to check out that just talked about how all the bankruptcies and all the job layoffs that were happening. It's great, depressing reading if you'd like to check it out. But probably the best summed up by Seth Godin when he said, the problem with scarcity is that there just isn't enough of it anymore. That there used to be a scarce supply of places where you could advertise and reach stakeholders. And it's probably best exemplified in the fact that when the jetliner went down in the Hudson, safe landing, the first pictures weren't from television, weren't from newspapers. They came from Twitter because everybody was empowered to be a collector of news. Finally, the mass media share of audience and the revenues crashed from on the left, where in the 1950s they had essentially the whole audience, to in 2010 they were a minority player. And in 2012, I believe it was, the US-wide advertising revenues for all print, for newspaper, magazines, all print altogether, was less than what Google was selling alone online. Facebook's IPO in 2012 was 20 times the value of what the Wall Street Journal had been sold for in 2007. And in the time since then, it's more than tripled. And so as Katie Couric would say, it's becoming really big now. So I want to talk about how social networking has played a huge role in the evolution of Mayo Clinic. Just earlier this month, a US News & World Report came out with its best hospital rankings, and Mayo Clinic came out with the #1 ranking. The thing I want to highlight here, though, is if you compare the metro area populations of Rochester, Minnesota, versus the rest of the hospitals in that top 10, we're sort of like rounding error. So using metro area loosely when they're talking about us. This is that US News rankings, but interestingly, we have patients coming to Mayo Clinic every year from every state in the United States, from about 140 countries, or a little over 140 countries, and more than 1 out of 5 of those comes from 500 miles away or more, so over 20%. Why is that? I'd suggest it has an awful lot to do with social networking. Dr. Will and Dr. Charlie were our founders. Dr. Will was the one on the right, the older brother. And as being both surgeons, they had this practice that they knew they needed to learn from others in order to provide the best care to every patient every day. And so in the spring, Dr. Will would travel around the United States, actually around the world, and Dr. Charlie would stay home and take care of the patients. And then in the fall, they'd switch places. In the definitive biography of the Mayo brothers, it says toward the end that by the end of the 1920s, Dr. Will could say that he had studied surgery in every town in the United States and in Canada of more than 100,000 people, and that he'd crossed the Atlantic Ocean 30 times. I asked our historical unit to go back and look at what were the countries, in addition to crossing the Atlantic 30 times, the other countries that Dr. Will visited in his lifetime. And here's the map, and here's the list, 25 countries. I mean, it's interesting that Dr. Will Mayo died in 1939, so did his brother Charlie. This travel was before the era of air travel, or it was all by steamship and by train to do this traveling. And it showed just the level of commitment and intensity they had toward reaching out and connecting with and learning from others. This is one of my favorite stories of Dr. Will when he visited Australia and New Zealand and Fiji. As he set sail, well, he didn't set sail, he set steam, I guess, from Vancouver. After having taken a train to Vancouver, He stopped first in New Zealand, where they got to see the Maori warriors do their haka dance that you may have seen in the Olympics or other rugby events. And then they followed up with, he visited lots of the surgeons. He spoke at a national society meeting, an international society meeting in New Zealand, but then went on to Melbourne and to Sydney. One of the operating rooms he visited was Dr. Hugh Devine, who was one of their leading surgeons. And the way Mayo Clinic got its name was because it was called the Mayo's Clinic. It was the place where other physicians, other surgeons came to learn as well, to observe what Dr. Will and Dr. Charlie and in their practice were accomplishing. So as you see the photo there of the other physicians gathered around them to learn, to watch them each morning. These are some interesting photos that I just got of something called the Surgeons Club. So it used to be called the International Surgeons Club. That's what the other surgeons wanted to call it, but then Dr. Will thought that sounded way too hoity-toity and they should just call it the Surgeons Club. But that photo on the left is from September 4th of 1909. The photo on the right is September 23rd of 1909. So just giving you a sense of the scale of the number of physicians that were coming to Rochester, Minnesota, in the middle of nowhere, really, to learn from the Mayo brothers. So my thesis here is that social networking has really been part of our DNA at Mayo Clinic for well over 100 years. And so what we've been working on with my team is moving from old-fashioned social networking, which is non-controversial, to this scary thing that people call social media. When I started at Mayo Clinic in 2000, we were just beginning a syndicated television program that was called Mayo Clinic Medical Edge Television. Again, recognizing what was happening in the economics of media. The television stations couldn't afford a dedicated health reporter. We knew that if we could provide a reliable, non-promotional, educational segment for the television news, that many stations would be interested because their viewers were interested in health issues. So in 2004, we began a similar program. This was a weekly 90-second package, a similar thing for radio, Medical Edge Radio, that was a daily 60-second radio segment. When I heard about podcasting in 2005, I said, wow, that's just a way to subscribe to have audio files sent to you, and we have audio files already on our website. So I used what I like to call the proceed until apprehended model of innovation. We created an RSS feed and listed it in the iTunes podcast directory. And lo and behold, the way I found out about this success and that we had been featured here was that someone from pharma called one of our content licensing groups and said that they wanted to advertise in our podcast. And so the call I got from this person was, they say they want to advertise in our podcast. Do we have a podcast? And that caused us to, but the result of this was that we went from 900 downloads a month of our radio segments to 74,000 downloads a month in 1 month. And that just gave us some internal traction, some internal attention that maybe instead of only focusing on the big media, there's something to this, what we called new media at the time. We found out shortly thereafter that we were represented in social networking, whether we liked it or not. So if you went to myspace.com/Mayo Clinic, some of you guys remember MySpace, it used to be really big. Anyway, MySpace, this is what you would see. This is not us. This is actually a British rock band that goes by the name Mayo Clinic. And we're pretty excited about the brand imagery that they've chosen there. And I'll warn you that it gets just a little bit worse. It gets a lot worse, but we'll go by really quickly. So moving right along, when Facebook made pages available to organizations in 2007, we got same-day approval to prevent the same thing from happening on Facebook that had already happened on MySpace. We followed shortly thereafter with being able to use the flip camera to capture consumer-grade video, getting on YouTube, getting on Twitter, actually about a year after it first launched, and also then into blogs. And that just opened up a ton of opportunities for us, and one of our great first examples involved Dr. Ruben Mesa, who is a hematologist, and he was leaving our Rochester, Minnesota practice to go to Arizona, to one of our southern campuses. And just before he left, we recorded this video with him with a flip camera, talking for 10.5 minutes about myelofibrosis, a kind of blood cancer. I will confess to you that I haven't watched this video in its entirety. But at the time that I took this screenshot, the right 14,000 people had. There are people who are affected, so that we're able to hyper-target actually through Google and through the magic of search optimization that happens with video, particularly since Google owns YouTube. I found out, a year later, I got an email from Dr. Mesa having, after his first year of experience down in Arizona. And I can let you read that for yourself, and I have tweeted out the link to these slides, so as I'm moving kind of quickly, you'll be able to go review them if you'd like. But essentially, he said, everybody who's coming to me from out of state is mentioning these videos. He said, I don't know whether they hear about me, Google me, and find the video, or whether they're shared first in a patient online support group. Kind of doesn't matter, because they're seeing me, they're seeing that I have the expertise, they're seeing that I'm a nice guy, and they decide that they want to put their trust in me. It's helping to build that rapport. So we decided to go back and look at the growth of the practice in our Florida campus, at our Jacksonville, Florida campus versus Arizona, in the years since these videos started and since Dr. Mesa went to Arizona. And as you can see, the practice used to be a little bit bigger in Florida. Now it's significantly bigger in Arizona, about 150% increase. And while Dr. Mesa would be the first to say, and I would be the second to say, that the videos aren't the only thing that have played a role here, clearly the fact that he's done these videos, he would report that they've had a significant role in increasing his practice. But beyond just increasing the practice, what we've been able to find is that because you're using a consumer-grade camera, $150 that wasn't consumed in the process, uploading to YouTube, which is free for storage and distribution, it drives down radically the cost of production and also the cost of delivery to the point where it doesn't take a whole lot in terms of additional patients coming for it to be worthwhile. And besides that, there's just the goodness of providing good information to people who need it. So out of this, I developed what I like to call Lee's Law of social media return on investment, that in the ROI equation, as the I approaches zero, ROI approaches infinity. Because again, the cost of production and storage and distribution has been driven so low that you don't need to have a whole lot in terms of increased patient volume for it to make a difference. So now I want to talk about how we're accelerating the transition, and based on some of these examples, a lot more than I have time to share with you now, our CEO, Dr. John Noseworthy, who is coming in as our new CEO in 2009, had sent a note to people a couple pay grades above, well, several pay grades above me, and said, I know we're doing a lot in social already, but have we critically considered whether we should make a bigger investment? And so this is just a quick clip from him talking about the logic behind us creating what is now the Mayo Clinic Social Media Network.
I'm going to talk a little bit about our founders. They saw it as their mission to reduce the burden of disease everywhere, not just in their rural practice here in Rochester, Minnesota, over 100 years ago. Following in their example, I'm proud to say that Mayo Clinic has been and intends to be among the leaders in using social media in medicine. I think it's only fitting that we should help this happen. This one is not about competitive advantage. This message is as it should be. It's all about the patient and how these tools can help us all serve them better and work together with the patients and their families for their health. We at Mayo Clinic are committed to helping our colleagues around the world who want to learn from us and with us how to apply these revolutionary tools to promote health, to fight disease, and to improve health care.
And so toward the end, we created what's now called the Mayo Clinic Social Media Network. Our goal first is to help our physicians and scientists and all employees at Mayo Clinic better understand these tools, better understand the rules of the road, and to think creatively about how they can apply these tools that are having such revolutionary impact in society, how they can apply them to the business of health. And so secondly then, and something that's really gratifying for me is that in keeping with the tradition of Dr. Will and Dr. Charlie, Dr. Noseworthy and our other leaders have said, this isn't just about Mayo Clinic, it's not about competitive advantage, it's about how can we help facilitate the engagement of others in using these platforms too. And so we make resources, we develop our resources for our Mayo Clinic staff, and then through the network we make them available to our colleagues. And we also generate a little revenue to support the mission too. The metaphor that I like to use here is that we're a catalyst. You know, our Mayo Clinic social media network reduces the activation energy. I was a chemistry minor in college, and so that's about what I remember from that time. But providing guidelines and best practices and some platforms and some training. We believe that physicians and scientists are really smart, that if we can trust them with narcotics and sharp instruments, we can trust them with social platforms too. But they do need the training. And we also know that they don't have the time to do all the training by themselves, or the trial and error that those of us who are communicators can do really isn't practical for them. So we try to facilitate and help them move along with it more quickly. So I'd encourage you to go to socialmedia.mayoclinic.org and get your basic free account, which is free. But that gives you access to some of the resources that we've developed. We also provide workshops, and in addition to the events that we hold, this is from an event that I did August 1st in Nairobi, Kenya. Our newest member of our network is Aga Khan University in Nairobi, Karachi, Pakistan. And our goal is to just help our colleagues around the world to be able to get engaged with these platforms. I was also really delighted that last September we were able to follow in the footsteps of Dr. Will Mayo, and we held our first international Mayo Clinic Social Media Summit in Australia, in Brisbane. Along with that, I had an opportunity to, I can't say hold a koala, because you don't get to hold a koala, you get to hold your hands on a platform, and the koala stays there if he or she wants to. But this is the map of where we've been able to go so far, where we've been able to reach within the United States and then around the world with some in-person events. But thankfully, because of the magic of the internet, we're able to make this online training that we provided available on demand, 24/7. So we worked with Hootsuite to produce what we believe is the first online CME course for medical professionals in social media, that instead of the trial and error, those physicians in particular who are using this can get basic training in a very short focused time on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn, things that they need to know, basic understanding they need to have to be able to use these tools effectively. And it has CME accreditation so that it's legitimate for medical professionals. But for those who are in marketing and communications, it's also a resource. We are using it as the resource for all of our Mayo Clinic employees who are interested in using social. It's sort of the first step that they need to take to prove that they're serious and that they'd like to use this. We also have a course that we call Social Media Residency, which is a one-day crash course. The prerequisite is to have completed the online basics certification. We have a few more opportunities available yet in 2016, in Jacksonville in September, in Rochester October, and then in December in Scottsdale, Arizona. Or you could join us in Melbourne, Australia, where we'll be holding our second international summit in November. Airfare's cheap. The US dollar is really strong against the Australian dollar, so if you're interested, if it's been on your bucket list to get to Australia, this would be a great chance for you to do that. With that, this is our contact information. I encourage you to check this out. Follow the hashtag MCSMN, and I'm delighted to have been able to be with you. Thanks very much.